about look at Diddy, for instance. Let's take a look at him. Let's take a look at, he has videos. He has videos of the parties. Now, what I've heard, which I don't know how much of it is in mainstream media, I don't really follow the story that much, but what I've heard from friends that are attorneys, friends of mine that have represented me before, agents and so on, is there's a bidding war going on right now.
The downfall of Sean Diddy Combs feels like a story ripped straight from a screenplay, one so outrageous that even Hollywood would have rejected it as too unbelievable. The empire he carefully crafted on glamour, bravado, and billion-dollar branding is now crumbling beneath the pressure of federal indictments, explosive court filings that read more like crime thrillers, and chilling whispers that he wasn't just a flashy playboy mogul, but the hidden architect behind one of the darkest mysteries in the history of hip-hop. Prosecutors allege racketeering, exploitation rings, and secret recordings that could secure a life sentence. His name has appeared nearly 50 times in sealed police transcripts tied to the ambush that ended Shockers' reign in Las Vegas, placing him closer to the shadows of that night than ever before. And while Diddy continues to insist on his innocence inside a New York courtroom, the walls are closing in. Former friends, once loyal to his empire, are beginning to speak out louder than ever. Loudly.
I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make up their brand.
Enter Gene Deal, the former bodyguard who witnessed everything from the back seats of armored SUVs and the balconies of luxury penthouse suites. Now, Deal has unleashed a revelation so explosive that it makes the charges against Diddy seem like just a fragment of a much larger and more sinister puzzle. According to him, Shakur was never the reckless hothead that the press insisted he was. In reality, he was calculating, strategic, and fully aware of the storm closing in around him. He knew the setup was underway. He understood exactly how high the bounty on his head had risen. And instead of waiting to be cornered by his enemies, Shakur orchestrated his own escape. Deal suggests that the rap icon transformed his outlaw persona into a survival manual. He tricked his would-be assassins, disappeared from U.S. soil, and stepped into a hidden life abroad under a new identity. And here's the twist. Diddy himself, the man who allegedly thought he engineered Shocker's downfall, was outplayed. That's the cruelest irony of all. Picture Diddy in boardrooms, surrounded by platinum plaques, convinced he had eliminated the only rival powerful enough to topple him, never realizing that the man he believed to be a casualty had in fact sidestepped the hit and vanished into legend. Gene Deal's account paints a different picture entirely. Diddy may have believed he was the puppeteer, pulling every string from the shadows, but in truth, he was the one deceived. The image of him gloating in private, certain he wore the crown uncontested, only to face the possibility decades later that his greatest rival might still be alive, is almost Shakespearean in scale. It doesn't just reframe the East Coast, West Coast feud, it transforms it. What was once remembered as a tragedy now looks more like one of the greatest long cons in music history.
Him and Big went through their thing, and I was Big Man. That was the extent of our beef.
And the clues were hiding in plain sight the entire time. Fans pored over the Dawn Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory album, obsessed with its chilling subtitle and the cryptic line, "Exit Tupac, enter Machiavelli." They noted that if you rearrange the letters in Machiavelli, it spells A.M. Alive K. For years, critics brushed these theories aside as nothing more than morbid Easter eggs left behind by a young man consumed by thoughts of death. But what if they weren't just artistic flourishes? What if they were instructions? A coded message designed as a survival blueprint by an artist who had studied the writings of Niccolò Machiavelli on deception, power, and the art of disappearing. If Gene Deal is correct, then that album wasn't a requiem, it was a proclamation of intent. Add to this the bizarre inconsistencies that appeared in the official record. The coroner's report listed Shakur as 6 feet tall and weighing 215 pounds, yet those who knew him personally swore he was 5'10" and barely 168 pounds. The supposed autopsy photo, with its oddly blurred tattoos and unnatural angles, never convinced the public it was genuine. And then there's the cremator, the man who allegedly oversaw Shocker's remains. Almost immediately after the cremation, he retired, vanished without explanation, and was never heard from again. That single disappearance lit the fuse for decades of speculation. Was the man's silence for playing a role in switching bodies? Or worse, was the corpse on the table not even Shakur at all?
I'm sorry, I'm just really, I'm in this moment right now. This is crazy. Sorry. People don't really know how much what it does to you when something that you love is taken from you and thrown away like it don't even matter, and then they move on with their lives and you're stuck. You're stuck during those years. You're still stuck 21 years later.
The stories only multiply once you look past the official paperwork. Former security officer Michael Nice once swore to TMZ that he personally played a role in smuggling Shakur out of the country after a contract was put on his head. Nice claimed Fidel Castro himself authorized the plan and even approved a body swap to cement the illusion of death. According to his account, Shakur was never gunned down in Las Vegas at all. Instead, he was escorted onto a private jet alongside Black Panthers, flown first to Barbados, and then delivered safely into Cuba. Nice remembered Shakur sitting in the cockpit, acting as co-pilot and shaking hands with his rescuers, like a man who knew he was stepping directly into his own myth. Yet before Nice could release the promised evidence, he turned up dead under mysterious circumstances. Was it a convenient coincidence? Or was he silenced, just another casualty in the effort to bury the truth forever? And still, the sightings never stopped. In Havana, locals whisper of a man who looks strikingly like Shakur strolling through the old streets in a bandana and dark sunglasses. His beard fuller, his shoulders broader, but his eyes, those eyes undeniable. Others claim to have seen him in Belize, even back in New Jersey. The internet remains flooded with photos purporting to show Shakur alongside Beyoncé or 50 Cent grainy, often dismissed as doctored, yet convincing enough to fuel speculation, and echo the very words Shakur once spoke from behind bars. Why you think nobody been arrested if they said they're the one that took me out? Because I ain't gone. I'm somewhere smoking a Cuban cigar. The more these threads are followed, the less it feels like a crime scene, and the more it resembles an elaborate stage production, meticulously scripted by the man at its center. Even Shocker's mother once hinted cryptically that her son had chosen to leave quietly. Was it a poetic flourish, a slip of the tongue, or a carefully coded admission that he had walked away on his own terms? And then, of course, there are the albums, those endless posthumous releases. Each one sounding uncannily alive, the voice too sharp, too fresh, too present, as though the man behind them was never silenced at all.
And then what's the stuff that's happening with Wendy Williams? You think this is all connection too?
Of course!
All of this circles back to Gene Deal's claim that Shakur wasn't blindsided, but instead anticipated the betrayal long before it struck. He understood the brutal price of independence in an industry where moguls play the roles of both kingmakers and enforcers. Refusing to bend or bow, Shakur saw the bounty on his head climb into the millions, and rather than wait for the trap to spring, he overturned the entire game. He transformed Machiavelli from a stage persona into a survival strategy. And if Deal's words hold any truth, Shakur may have carved out an exile far from the glare of cameras, living in secrecy, waiting for the moment to resurface. Which leaves open the greatest twist of all, his return, timed perfectly, to confront the very men who believed they had erased him. The earliest cracks in the illusion appeared with the whispers of a body double. Stories circulated that another man, already dead, was substituted into Shocker's hospital bed to stage the performance of his final act. The inconsistencies in the coroner's report became the smoking evidence. The hasty cremation became the ultimate red flag. Under this theory, the frenzy outside the hospital wasn't confusion, it was choreography. Every scream, every camera flash, every rushed announcement was part of a larger stage play. And by the time Suge Knight stumbled into the night, wrapped in bandages and shock, Shakur was already en route to a hidden runway, his aliases ready, vanishing into the Caribbean darkness. The world was left only with grainy photos, contradictory statements, and official reports, while the man himself slipped cleanly beyond reach. Now, as Diddy sits shackled under the weight of federal charges, accused of coercion, trafficking, and running his empire as if it were a criminal syndicate, the irony cuts deeper than ever. He may still believe he executed the perfect move back in 1996, eliminating his greatest rival and securing the East Coast crown. But if Shakur is alive, somewhere out there, watching and waiting, then Diddy has spent decades reveling in nothing more than a hollow victory. And should the day ever come when Shakur steps back into the spotlight, revealing what could be the greatest disappearing act in music history, everything Diddy built would crumble in an instant. Because nothing could haunt him more than the realization that the man he thought was dead had been alive all along.
Unfortunately, we're all going to take a disgusting trip to his seedy, awful world. You know, the man has no class. He has no kindness in his dark, dark heart. And he's depraved. That's my opinion. This is a depraved, disgusting individual about whom I wish to hear nothing after this trial is done.
The inconsistencies, the hushed confessions, the reported sightings, the strange anomalies in the autopsy, they all converge into a single unsettling possibility. What if that night in Las Vegas was never truly an ending, but instead the beginning of something far more calculated? What if the hail of bullets was only the cover for a meticulously orchestrated vanishing act, pulled off with the precision of a master tactician? What if the real Tupac Shakur has been alive all this time, hidden in plain sight for nearly 30 years, simply biding his time until the right moment to return? If that's the case, then the narrative isn't closed. It may only now be approaching the moment where Diddy's darkest nightmares finally materialize. Behind the smoke and speculation, one thread emerges that is impossible to dismiss: the Black Panthers. Shakur was never just another rapper caught in the web of industry rivalries. He was the child of revolutionaries, born into a family deeply rooted in activism and resistance. His mother, Afeni Shakur, had been a leading Panther, and his godfather was a radical organizer who spent decades locked in battle with federal agencies. With roots that deep, is it really difficult to imagine there being a safety net waiting, ready to catch him when Los Angeles became too dangerous? Some insiders argue that the chaos of the Vegas shooting wasn't random violence at all, but the signal for a carefully choreographed extraction, executed by operatives who had spent their entire lives in the shadows. If any network possessed the means, the discipline, and the ideological drive to spirit him away under the government's nose, it was them. And in many ways, what greater act of defiance could there be than preserving the life of the most outspoken rapper of his generation, transforming him into a living symbol of resistance?
So, Terrence Howard appeared on the PBD podcast with Patrick Bet-David, and the episode, this premiered on April 4th. Definitely making the rounds, because in this episode, Terrence Howard describes an interaction with Diddy where he says that he believes that Diddy was trying to have with him. Let's take a listen.
That connection takes on even greater weight when we look at his aunt, Assata Shakur, still listed as one of the most wanted women in America after breaking out of prison and resurfacing in Cuba. If she could disappear right under federal custody and secure sanctuary on an island openly defying Washington, then why couldn't her nephew follow the same route? Whispers claim that the very same underground channels that delivered Assata safely to Havana were later reopened for Tupac. For the Panthers, this wasn't merely about protecting a celebrity voice. It was about preserving a bloodline, safeguarding the heir of their movement, and guaranteeing that his message could never be permanently silenced. Every lyric about fighting oppression, every verse about refusing to bow down, stood as proof that he was far more than a performer. He had become a living emblem of resistance, someone too valuable to lose. That leads directly to Michael Nice, the man who stepped forward years later with a story that sounded almost too cinematic to believe. He painted a picture of Tupac climbing aboard a private jet, surrounded by Panther operatives, with adrenaline pumping like fugitives escaping a fortress. Nice recalled, "It was me and my brother, the pilot, Tupac as co-pilot, and 2 Panther guys on the jet. We took off and immediately knew we were safe. We felt good. It was like escaping prison." According to his version, nothing about the mission was improvised. It wasn't reckless. It was authorized. He even insisted that Fidel Castro personally approve the extraction, setting clear conditions for Shocker's survival in exile: remain silent, never acknowledge being alive, and never take a risk that could drag Cuba into a political firestorm.
Scandal.
Same thing for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the interesting thing about the Epstein and the theory about Epstein is we know he filmed people for sure on that island. He has a lot of movies, a lot of films of people that are very, very powerful political figures, and entertainers, business people. So, do you really believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself? Of
course not.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is where the story takes a darker, more tangled turn. Just when Michael Nice vowed he was ready to unveil concrete proof, news broke that he was gone. For many who had followed his interviews and cryptic claims, that timing was anything but coincidence. Was it simply poor health, an unfortunate twist of fate? Or was he deliberately silenced to make sure the truth about SHOCKS' survival never saw daylight? Even Nice's own associates admitted his passing arrived at the most convenient moment possible, cutting off any chance of documents, recordings, or sworn testimony ever surfacing. And when someone that close to the fire vanishes without warning, suspicion doesn't vanish with them, it multiplies. Even the fragments Nice revealed before his death carry chilling implications. He described a staged body switch inside the hospital. He spoke of vast amounts of money exchanging hands and a double position to impersonate a lifeless Shakur. He claimed the wave of relief came only after the plane touched down in Barbados, before the final covert handoff to Cuba. If those statements hold any truth, it suggests the entire Vegas scene was nothing more than theater, an elaborate stage play designed for the cameras, while the real man was already vanishing across international waters. The Panthers supplied the muscle, Castro offered the sanctuary, and Shakur himself delivered the deception. Together, it became the perfect trinity of survival.
I can't wait. I can't wait for everybody to find out what's really been going on in the background.
Life in exile is rarely as romantic as the legends make it sound. For someone like Shakur, a man who drew power from public energy and thrived on constant reinvention, being forced into decades of silence wouldn't just be a survival tactic, it would feel like a sentence. Stripped of roaring crowds, robbed of the adrenaline of performance, each day would become a slow erosion of identity. Exile doesn't just demand distance, it demands invisibility. And invisibility, over time, becomes suffocating. The longer he remained hidden, the more the charismatic poet of the 90s could have been reshaped into something altogether different, molded not by applause but by solitude and secrecy. Psychologists often describe long-term isolation as a kind of second birth. The person who disappears into hiding is rarely the same person who comes out, if they come out at all. For Shakur, that transformation could have cut deep. His music had always been about rebellion, survival, and resistance, but in exile, those instincts may have hardened into something darker. Paranoia, mistrust, and the ever-present sense that betrayal could arrive without warning. Decades of living in the margins, blending into the background, and watching the world move forward without him may have reduced him to an observer rather than the fiery participant he once was. The Shakur fans remember was young, relentless, fearless. The Shakur of today, if he still breathes, might be someone whose flame hasn't gone out, but instead burns differently, less as a raging blaze, and more as a slow, enduring ember.
Just different things that's not really beef though. That's just competitive.
Competitiveness.
All right. So you and Diddy, you and Puff cool?
No, I don't really rock with him.
Okay.
And that leaves us with a haunting question. If Shakur were to emerge from the shadows today, would we even recognize him? Not just in the wrinkles carved by time or the years etched into his body, but in the very fabric of who he is. Could a man reshaped by decades of silence, secrecy, and constant self-erasure still reflect the ideals he once carried so loudly? Or would the exile have altered him beyond recognition, his worldview twisted by isolation? His return might not shock us because he is alive, but because the figure standing before us would feel like a stranger, someone forged in darkness, carrying truths too heavy for the spotlight he once commanded. That possibility raises the stakes of his reappearance even higher, because the Diddy of today may not be confronted by the Shakur of the past, but by a version reforged by survival itself. And that leads to the darker question, why remain hidden for so long? If exile was designed to shield him, why not resurface once the danger cooled? That's where the story crashes back into Diddy's orbit. In some tellings, Diddy himself issued the final ultimatum, vanish or meet a permanent end. The whispered bounty, the the millions allegedly placed on Shocker's head, was more than a passing rumor. It was a warning, a reminder that no corner of America would ever be safe for him again. Faced with an impossible choice, disappear into silence or risk annihilation in public, Shakur chose exile. In a cruel twist, it may have been Diddy's own hunger for dominance that pushed the legend out of the spotlight, turning what should have been a bloody conclusion into one of the most enduring, vanishing acts in the history of music.
Is he this gangster that behind the scenes is that him? Or is that
Shout out to Wendy Williams.
Think about the irony. The mogul who once believed he had wiped his greatest rival off the board may have, in truth, built the very conditions for that rival's survival. 4 years, Diddy strutted with untouchable wealth, crowning himself a king while federal agents tightened their grip, and waves of accusers stepped forward with chilling tales of coercion, manipulation, and intimidation. Yet all that time, somewhere beyond the spotlight, the one man he feared most may have been alive, observing from a distance, gathering evidence, and waiting for the day when the world would finally be ready to face him again. The whispers today are louder, sharper, and bolder than ever before. Some claim Shakur has safeguarded a secret archive, an arsenal of unreleased recordings, testimonies, and written confessions that, if revealed, could reduce Diddy's last defenses to dust. Others believe his disappearance wasn't just about survival, but about strategy, that he has been orchestrating a return with precision, waiting for the exact moment when his reemergence would strike with maximum force. And now, with Diddy's empire unraveling in flames, with prosecutors circling like predators and former allies stepping away in fear, many suspect that moment may be drawing closer. Which leaves us with the question that has haunted millions of people for decades. What happens if Shakur steps back into the light tomorrow? Would the image of him standing alive, defiant, and unbroken at a microphone finally collapse the fragile remains of Diddy's empire? Could he unleash a hidden history that dismantles everything we thought we knew about the East Coast, West Coast feud? Or would his return spark chaos, exposing the unimaginable lengths the powerful went to in order to bury the truth forever? If that day arrives, it will not merely alter the history of music, it will set off a cultural detonation in real time, shaking foundations that seemed untouchable. And maybe, just maybe, that is what Diddy fears most as he sits confined, watching headlines tighten around him. Not just the ruling of a judge, but the possibility of a rival's resurrection, the one man he thought he had erased forever. So we put the question to you. If Shakur returns, does Diddy's empire collapse overnight, or does the world rally behind the legend who outplayed them all? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay alert, because the next headline might not just tell a story, it might confirm a revolution. Until then, stay vigilant, stay questioning, and we'll meet again in the shadows.